Bryce Young is coming off of quite literally the best game of his NFL career. Over 400 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions against the Atlanta Falcons on the road in an overtime victory. And I want to finally pose the question after over 2.5 years of evidence. Is Bryce Young a franchise quarterback? Now, before we get started, I want to go ahead and say that this is something that I decided quite a long time ago. I've been convinced of it, and I think the evidence shows that the answer is clearly no. I understand that he did do well against the Falcons, which, in my opinion, are not that bad of a defensive team. But the context behind so many of these situations is unbelievably key, and I'm going to try to provide that for you today before finally giving you my subjective opinion at the end. So let's go ahead and look at the overall stats for Bryce Young. This year, he is, I believe, 6-4, 6-5 is his overall record. In his 6 wins, he's averaging 207 yards passing per game. If you take away that 400-yard one, that number is close to 160 yards per game in the wins for the Panthers this season. This is a very run-heavy, defensive-oriented team. A lot of that could be pinned on Bryce Young's limitations, but I won't do that just yet. Strictly looking at the facts, he's 12-26 as a starter in the league, 2-20 against teams with winning records, and he is 27th out of 38 qualified quarterbacks on PFF's grading scale this year. Arguably, this is his best season, and yet we see once again 27 out of 38 qualified quarterbacks is nowhere near the decision making that needs to happen around whether or not someone is or is not a franchise quarterback. In my opinion, that is really all you need to know right there. 27 of 38 on the quarterbacks list, but we can continue. Let's talk about some more stats here. He is 20th in the league in touchdowns, 29th in QBR, 31st in passer rating, 25th in completion percentage, and 32nd in yards per pass this season. Now, once again, a lot of this can be pinned on the scheme for the Panthers. They, once again, are run heavy. They gave the ball to Rico Dowdle more times than I think anybody else in multiple weeks throughout this season. Now, the question is whether or not that has something to do with Bryce Young. In my opinion, this is where we get into the subjectivity of this. In my opinion, the answer is absolutely yes. Now, the Panthers have been able to control the leads in several of the games that they've played in, but look at the games that they played in that they were non-competitive in. Buffalo, Jacksonville, and then last but certainly not least, I forget off the top of my head. New Orleans, excuse me. These 3 games were blowout losses, and it had to do with the ineptity or the anemic offense for the Panthers. That had a lot to do, in my opinion, with Bryce Young. Now, he was injured earlier on this season. I won't pin the offense's struggles on him for that particular reason. But overall, in almost every single one of these games, he's been healthy. Yet, we see that when he plays winning teams, it's hard to compete. Why? Because winning teams have usually good to great defenses, and his athletic limitations are what hold him back. I think, head up, I think he's a good quarterback. I don't really think he makes a ton of bad decisions. I think he just makes the wrong ones when it comes to his size limitations. He can't really see over the linemen, and if you don't believe me, ask Tua, who is almost the exact same size as Bryce Young. He openly admitted that he can't see over the linemen earlier this season. So for people trying to argue with me in the comments about whether or not Bryce Young can read the whole field during the play, the answer to that question is no, he cannot. The scheme reflects that. A lot of the Panthers' offense is outside oriented, and that provides some major limitations for guys like Xavier Legette. I am convinced that this Panthers franchise is going to try to continue to make this work. I just don't see how it's possible given the numbers and the sample size that we have. Now, can Bryce Young be a utility or a usable quarterback on a franchise that is competing for a playoff spot? Sure. That's what he's doing this season. We see that they're 6-5. They're potentially on the fringe of the playoffs. It's going to be hard to win the division, but that being said, Bryce Young has done a serviceable job. The problem is what is the ceiling? And in my opinion, the ceiling has been reached. This is as good as we're going to see the Panthers be. I don't foresee, outside of the NFC South being completely inept, which, by the way, is very possible. Look at the Saints. They're a broken organization. Look at the Falcons. My God, they can't get anything right. And then the Buccaneers are just injury plagued and have been for quite some time. So it is possible for the Panthers to win a division title with Bryce Young as the quarterback. But what does that really mean? Is that something that they're aspiring for, a division title? Or are you hoping to win divisional playoff games, NFC championships, Super Bowls? When you look at the sample size that we have and you look at Bryce Young versus those caliber of teams, you do not see victories often. Once again, 2-20 against teams with winning records. One of those games came versus the Packers this season. And look at that game. It was an offensive slop fest. The Panthers put up 13 points. It's not like Bryce Young was leading some kind of onslaught on the road against Green Bay. So in my opinion, the answer to solving the Panthers' woes offensively is quite simply to go find another quarterback. I don't like disparaging players. I think Bryce Young is a great young man and could be an awesome backup quarterback somewhere. But unfortunately, the things that I'm talking about today are things that he simply cannot change. It has to do with his lack of superior athleticism, like a Kyler Murray, who has also struggled in the league. Look at smaller quarterbacks all around the NFL. It takes a lot to see them succeed. Now, we see that happens in spots. Tua was a 4,000-yard passer just a couple of years ago. But what happens in the playoffs? They have to go on the road to Kansas City in a cold environment, with Kansas City's defense being one of the best in the league, and Tua looked horrible. Kyler Murray is a September and October merchant. He has done phenomenal in those months. But once it gets cold, once you have to go on the road, once you have to play stout defenses and winning teams, Kyler Murray has struggled. The playbook for these type of quarterbacks is out there, and I wish that it wasn't. I wish Bryce Young all the success, and I hope that he defies my criticisms, because I'm rooting for him, as I am almost any player in the NFL. But once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am presenting you a case where the facts are almost insurmountable, in my opinion. It's going to be impossible for Bryce Young to overcome the limitations that he has and become a Super Bowl contending quarterback. There are just so many other quarterbacks that stand in his way. Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, in my opinion, is better. Jalen Hurts. There are just, I cannot describe to you how much discomfort I feel making this video. Once again, I don't like disparaging players, but I think the narrative is already out there. So I'm speaking to something that is kind of the obvious, in my opinion. There's really nothing that can be done here for the Panthers. I do think that they can get better in the skill position group. Rico Dowdle has had a great year, but in terms of household running back names, he's not one that you write home about. And then last but certainly not least, look at the receiving core, the tight ends group. It's getting better. It's way better than it was a couple seasons ago. But is it anywhere near the caliber that Bryce Young needs to succeed at a very high level? Absolutely not. So the Panthers have an organizational decision. Do they double down and try to make this Bryce Young QB situation work? Or are they going to move on either this offseason or the next? I think both of those are inevitable. In my opinion, I would move on from Bryce Young. The problem is now with Carolina is you're not bad enough anymore to get a high caliber pick. The Panthers are 6-5. At worst, they're going to finish the season 7-10. That will yield you like a 12th or a 13th overall pick. And they're in a situation once again like they were in 2022 where they have to trade the house away for the number 1 overall pick. That was the main issue that sits with the Panthers today is they sold the house to buy a bigger one, and it turns out that bigger one caught on fire and is non-existent anymore, and they had no insurance. So now what do you do as the Carolina Panthers? I don't know if they have much of a choice. I think they have to move on, but at the same time, like I said, the value for a new quarterback, quite simply, is not there this offseason. So do you run it back with Bryce Young one more time? It's definitely possible. I promise you, if there was a quarterback on the market or there was a marquee guy that the Panthers had the ability to move up and get, they would absolutely go and do that. But I think a lot of people are going to point to games like Atlanta in the offseason and say, well, look at that game. That's the one that you should focus on, not this other mound of evidence that shows you the opposite. Take the Atlanta game and run with it. Bryce Young can be a winning quarterback. I don't see that as the case. Once again, I think the Panthers will eventually choose to move on from him in the next season or two. I highly doubt they would franchise tag him or pick up his fifth-year option and or re-sign him to a contract, but I'm more than willing to admit when I'm wrong. Right? I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I'm going to make all these excuses for why Bryce Young actually, did something that I didn't expect. If Bryce Young comes out and continues to perform like he did versus Atlanta for the rest of the season, the Panthers make the playoffs, and they're at minimum competitive in a playoff game, then I will sit here and say, Bryce Young should be a franchise quarterback, and I was wrong. I just don't think that's the case, and that is the issue that I foresee with this Panthers team. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think of Bryce Young's future, and quite honestly, if I'm just dead wrong. I know a lot of Panthers fans, if they jump into the comments, they're going to say I'm just a hater, but I'm a guy who has rooted for Bryce Young all the way going back into college. I actually watched him play against Kansas State back in 2022 in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, and I loved the way that he plays the game. I think he's a surgical quarterback, but playing in college versus playing in the pros are two different things. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you next time.